Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on Setting Aside of Arbitral Awards. It is our pleasure to host for you a stellar panel of speakers. We have before us, first and foremost, Justice L. Nageshwar Rao, who of course needs no introduction. Justice Rao started his illustrious career as a respected lawyer in Andhra Pradesh. He went on to first be designated as a senior advocate and then as an additional Solicitor General of India 3 times before being elevated as a judge to the Supreme Court. He has played a role in shaping jurisprudence of arbitration from both sides of the bench throughout his career. Some of the more famous judgments on arbitration authored by him include Inox Wins, South Delhi Municipal Corporation versus SMS, etc. He's also authored several landmark judgments on a variety of issues such as admissibility of evidence, reservation and promotions, etc. He's currently a member of the bench hearing the Sabrimala review petition as well. Sir, it is our pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. K.V. Vishwanathan, who again is extremely popular in our circles. He was appointed as a senior advocate and has also served the nation as an additional Solicitor General in the past. He has argued in several landmark arbitration cases, including BCCI versus Kochi, Shriram versus Rio Glass, Banarsi Krishna versus Karmayogi, etc. His diverse areas of expertise range from criminal law to privacy and even insolvency laws. He has assisted the Supreme Court as an amicus curiae in cases relating to insolvency and guarantees, elevation of advocates to the bench, admission of qualified persons to medical courses, etc. So once again, it is a pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for coming over. The session will be moderated by, again, 2 people who you will be very familiar with. Mr. Shashank Garg, a partner at Advani & Co., who has experience of over 10 years. He has appeared as both counsel before arbitral tribunal and as also an arbitrator himself. He served as a regional chapter coordinator for the ICC Young Arbitration Forum from 2017 to 19 and is currently a member of arbitration committees and commissions of the Delhi International Arbitration Center, Nani Palkawala Arbitration Center, the ICC Commission on Arbitration and ADR, etc. Being accredited by ADR ODR Group London and SIAB, he has edited and co-authored several books and has been recognized as a key individual in dispute resolution by Legal 500 and a star Rising 40 Under 40. Shashank, pleasure to have you with us. Finally, but not least, is Mr. Sameer Jain, who is the managing partner at PSL Advocates and Solicitors. He has appeared as counsel and arbitrator in both national and international arbitrations. He's a member of the ICC Commission on Arbitration and ADR and has been on the core committee of ICC's India Arbitration Group. He's an accredited member of SIAM, India representative to ICC Young Arbitrators Forum, and a certified mediation trainer. He's also been recognized as a leading individual in arbitration by Legal 500 and as litigation star by Benchmark for international arbitration and disputes. With that brief introduction, I will now hand over to Shashank and Sameer to moderate the session. Over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Vikas, for that detailed introduction. Without wasting any more time, I would now request Honorable Justice Nageshwar Rao to give his opening address. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vishwanathan, Sameer Jain, Shashank Garg, Vikas. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to participate in this webinar on the scope of Section 34 of the Arbitration Act, which is being conducted by the Center for Online Dispute Resolution, Indian Arbitration Forum, and Arbitration India Group. This is an opportunity for all of us to enhance our knowledge on Section 34, which is a very important provision in the Arbitration Act 1996, which frequently comes under judicial focus, especially in view of the legislative policy that the judicial interference and supervision over matters of arbitration should be minimal. I will try to take you through the provision itself and then give you my understanding of certain aspects which are not written in the provision as have been interpreted by the courts. Before doing that, I have to tell you that arbitration as an alternate dispute resolution mechanism is very much necessary for the Indian scenario, as there are about 3.23 crore cases that are pending in all courts in this country. Barring those matters which are criminal and relating to other branches of law. We have about 90 lakh pending civil cases in this country. The judge population ratio is much lesser than it is in the other parts of the world. Thereby, in addition to the other issues, we have problems pertaining to cases taking a long time to be decided in courts. An effective alternate dispute resolution mechanism like arbitration will take load off the courts and provide efficient and speedy disposal of conflicts in commercial disputes. Apart from the burden on the court being taken away, this would also provide ease in commercial transactions. And in that field, we are lower down in the ranking, 178th in about 189 countries. There is an imminent need for the Arbitration Act to work effectively, which has been taken note of by the legislature itself. The 1940 Act was amended, was repealed, and the 1996 Act on the UNCITRAL model came into force, and there were certain issues that were cropping up on the interference by courts and as to whether the legislative policy has been taking shape properly. There was another amendment made in 2015, followed by yet another in 2019. There is a bearing of these 2015 and 19 amendments on Section 34 as well, which I will take you through. To start with, Section 34 deals with applications for setting aside arbitral awards. The first point is that there is no suo motu jurisdiction that is vested in a court to set aside an award without an application because of the plain language used in Section 34(1). The recourse to a court against an arbitral award may be made only by an application for setting aside the award, is how Section 34(1) reads. Before I proceed further to go to 34(2), the proceedings under Section 34 in a court of law are summary in nature. The idea is to ensure that these proceedings under Section 34 are also disposed of early and expeditiously. Now proceeding to Section 34(2). 34(2) starts out by saying that an arbitral award may be set aside by the court only if, the significant words here are only if, which would mean that except for whatever grounds are mentioned in 34(2), an award cannot be set aside. 34(2)(a) says that the party making an application establishes on the basis of the record of the arbitral tribunal. These words, establishes on the basis of the record of the arbitral tribunal, was brought by an amendment in 2019 for the words furnishes proof, which would mean that what has to be looked into is only the record of the arbitral tribunal, and only on the basis of the record of the arbitral tribunal, a party should establish that a ground has been made out, and that too ground which has been mentioned in 34 for seeking setting aside of an arbitral award. The first ground that is mentioned in 34(2)(a)(1) pertains to incapacity. Incapacity relates to physical as well as mental incapabilities. We need not labor much on this. The 34(2)(a)(2) speaks of the agreement itself not being valid, being a ground for setting aside the award. And the other ground is audio alterum partem, where a party not being given a notice can make it a ground for setting aside an award. This notice pertains to not only the initial notice, but also an opportunity to have an effective representation during the course of the proceedings as well. And the fourth ground relates to an arbitral award dealing with a dispute not contemplated by or not falling within the terms of submission to the award, that is, traveling beyond the scope of the reference that is made. And fifth pertains to the composition of the arbitral tribunal, not in accordance with the agreement of the parties. These are the 5 grounds which are dealt with in 34(2)(a), and 34(2)(b), which is more important, refers to the subject matter of a dispute not capable of settlement by arbitration under the law for the time being in force, which means arbitrability of a dispute is dealt with in B1. What are the disputes that are arbitrable are not mentioned in the Arbitration Act. But there are certain disputes by their very nature which are not arbitrable. In Booz Allen, Justice Ravindran dealt with certain issues in the background of an application filed under Section 8, but also goes on to refer to the legal position in Section 34 to say that disputes in rem cannot be decided in arbitrations. Disputes in personam are those which can be settled through arbitrations. If the status of an individual, if the status of a thing is in dispute, then it cannot be decided in arbitration. Criminal cases can't be decided in arbitration. Matrimonial disputes like child custody, divorce, decrees, etc. cannot be done in arbitrations. Certain matters pertaining to patents, insolvency, these are aspects which can be dealt with only by a court of law and not in arbitration. So B1 speaks about an arbitrable dispute which is not capable, a dispute which is not capable of settlement by arbitration can be a ground for setting aside an award. The most important aspect or point on which an arbitral award can be set aside, which has undergone a change over the years, is public policy. B2 deals with an arbitral award being in conflict with public policy, being a ground for setting aside that award. Public policy was described as a very unruly horse, and when once you get astride, you never know where it will carry you. This was what Justice Burroughs said in Richardson versus Mellish in 1824. There was an improvement that was made by Justice Lord Denning, who said that a horse can be tamed if the person who gets onto the horse is a person who can do it well. So public policy has been of an indeterminate definition for a very long time. But insofar as the arbitrations are concerned, for the first time in Renu Sagar, 1994, Supplement 1 ACC 644, this court, the Supreme Court said that enforcement of a foreign award can be refused on the ground that it is contrary to public policy. And an award was stated to be contrary to public policy when it was contrary to fundamental policy of Indian law, the interests of India, and justice and morality. Thereafter, after the 1996 Act was promulgated, in ONGC versus Sawpipes, another ground was added to this, wherein the ground of patent illegality was brought in. So along with the other 3 grounds which were enunciated by Renu Sagar, public policy included patent illegality after ONGC. And the patent illegality being a ground for setting aside an award which was in violation, or which is supposed to be in violation of public policy, has been dealt with by the Supreme Court later in Western Geco as well as Associate Builders. But without going into those judgments, which is going to take a long time, the latest judgment in SsangYong, the earlier judgments have been dealt with by Justice Nariman. And he looks into the amendments that have been carried out in 2015, especially pertaining to public policy. And then he also says that his earlier judgment in Associate Builders has to be read in the light of the amendments that were carried out. The amendment that was carried out to the Arbitration Act in 2015 was on the basis of the Law Commission report, the 246 Law Commission report, which was submitted by Justice A.P. Shah. The amendment that was made is through this explanation, which now reads as under. Explanation 1 to 2B2 says, for avoidance of any doubt, it is clarified that an award is in conflict with the public policy of India. Again, the words only if are used. It's very useful to look at the language that is used here to understand why the legislature was so clear in saying for avoidance of any doubt, it is clarified, which means what they are clarifying is what would be the public policy, which can be a ground for setting aside an award. Only if the making of the award was induced or affected by fraud or corruption, or was in violation of section 75 or 81, it is in contravention with the fundamental policy of Indian law, or it is in conflict with the most basic notions of morality or justice. These are the three grounds that have been inserted by the 2015 amendment. Fraud or corruption being a ground for setting aside an award would fall within the province of public policy. Violation of 75 and 81. 75 deals with confidential matters, and 81, what all statements are made by a party during conciliation and other proceedings cannot be part of an award, and if it is part of an award, that would be a ground for setting aside an award on this public policy principle. So what remains is fundamental policy of India and most basic notions of morality or justice. Coming to the fundamental policy of Indian law, as I have already said, Renu Sagar was the first case in which fundamental policy of Indian law was mentioned. And thereafter, in ONGC versus Western Geco, fundamental policy was dealt with in this manner. The explanation that was given to fundamental policy was threefold. The first is that if an order which is passed by an adjudicatory body is not in accordance with the principle of judicial behavior, that would be the first ground. And the second one is the principle of natural justice not being followed would be in violation of fundamental policy of Indian law. And the third aspect pertains to the principle of irrationality. And in Western Geco, the principles of Wednesbury have been brought in. Wednesbury's principle of irrationality is the principle of unreasonableness, and that was also made a ground for setting aside an award under this head of fundamental policy of Indian law. In Associate Builders, Justice Nariman adopted the approach of Western Geco, and he also said that patent illegality can be a ground. Fundamental policy being explained in this manner. He also said that perversity is a ground, though he did not pitch the interference on every ground of unreasonableness in Wednesbury, but perversity was made a ground in Associate Builders. After the amendment 2015, and the language used now being very clear that it is in contravention with the fundamental policy of India and the basic notions, most basic notions of morality or justice, Justice Nariman in SsangYong, he revised his opinion in given in Associate Builders, now to say that such of those grounds which are part of section 18 and 34(2)(a)(3) of the 1996 Act will still hold good insofar as principles of fundamental policy are concerned. But otherwise, as things stand, Wednesbury's principle is out, because the idea is that the interference by courts is minimal. And once the administrative law principles of Wednesbury are brought in for the purpose of reviewing the arbitral awards, that might be giving more leverage to the courts to go into the merits, especially when the legislature says that you cannot go into the merits. That's very clear in explanation 2, which says that for avoidance of doubt again, the test as to whether there is a contravention with the public fundamental policy of Indian law shall not entail a review on the merits of the dispute. It's made very clear there. The other explanation that is added by the 2015 Act is 2A, not the explanation, 2A itself, whereby patent illegality has been removed from the public policy and then made applicable only in respect of domestic awards. 2A categorically says that awards arising out of arbitrations other than international commercial arbitrations, patent illegality can be a ground for setting aside an award. Patent illegality again has been dealt with in the same judgments of ONGC, Associate Builders, and 3 subheads have been mentioned in Associate Builders, which can be grounds for setting aside an award on patent illegality. One is that the award is contrary to the substantive law of India, which is ingrained in section 28(1)(a) of the 1996 Act itself. The second pertains to a ground which you can find in section 31(3) of the Act, where the arbitrator has not given any reasons for the award. And the third is in connection with section 28(3) of the 1996 Act. If the arbitral tribunal finds that the award is not in accordance with the terms of the contract, that is the third ground which would fall under patent illegality. In any event, by the latest judgment, patent illegality has been watered down again by Justice Nariman, who says that patent illegality on the face of the award should be such that would shock the conscience of the court, and patent illegality cannot give a handle to the court to go into the merits of the case and review it. The same would be followed insofar as morality or justice is concerned. So the amendments having been taken into account, 2015 as well as the 2019 amendments, the interpretation of the provision, that is section 34, has been in a manner whereby the courts would like to stay its hands off insofar as arbitral awards are concerned, unless the award is suffering from certain defects which are covered by section 34. Apart from this, there are 2 or 3 other aspects which would come up for consideration whenever we discuss about section 34. The first aspect pertains to automatic stay of the award in applications that are filed under section 36. Before the 2015 amendment, the position as understood by judgments of the Supreme Court is that once an application under section 34 is filed, the award is automatically stayed. That was changed by an amendment that is made to section 36, in which it was made clear that unless an order is passed by the court, there is no automatic stay. There was a problem pertaining to the applicability of the 2015 amendments to the arbitrations which commenced prior to the date of the amendment, that is 23rd of October 2015, and prior to the applications filed under Section 34 prior to that date. In BCCI versus Kochi, the Supreme Court dealt with this aspect and made an attempt to resolve the controversy by holding that the amendment shall be made applicable even to petitions that were pending on 23rd of October 2015. The Supreme Court went into Section 36, the interpretation of the provision itself, to say that whatever interpretation about automatic stay given earlier might also not be correct. And this automatic stay being some sort of a double whammy. The Supreme Court was also informed about the prospective amendment that was going to be made. And it made a comment saying that it would not be wise to bring back this automatic stay to all petitions that were pending, that were already filed, that were pending on the date of the amendment. After the judgment of BCCI versus Kochi, the amendment that was made in 2019, by which Section 26 of the 2015 Act was repealed and Section 87 was added to the 1996 Act. The effect of the amendment is that the principle laid down in Section 36 after the amendment of 2015 shall be applicable only to arbitrations and petitions after the Amendment Act has come into force. That was challenged, and Justice Nariman declared the amendment to be manifestly arbitrary and violative of Article 14, not even taking into account the judgment of BCCI versus Kochi, only looking into Justice B.N. Sri Krishna's recommendations. By giving reasons, the court was of the opinion that the amendment would not stand scrutiny of law, and the 2019 amendment has gone. So the result is that as of now, there is no automatic stay even to petitions that are pending, that were pending on that date. Another interesting aspect which is widely discussed whenever Section 34 comes is pertaining to seat and venue. This is one conundrum which is faced by the courts in a number of matters. We thought that the controversy was put at rest in the case of Balco. A constitutional bench, apart from other issues pertaining to the scope of Part 1 of the Act, dealt with this aspect in a very detailed manner, and then held that the choice of a seat would also decide the exclusive jurisdiction aspect. But Para 96 of the judgment in Balco again gave scope for interpretation in a different manner, because in Para 96, the later half of Para 96, it was held that Section 20 also comes into play, and there's still a scope of 2 places having jurisdiction. So the exclusive jurisdiction aspect again came up before the Supreme Court in Indus Mobile Distribution, and it was held in Indus Mobile Distribution that designation of a seat is akin to the exclusive jurisdiction clause. There was a problem pertaining to this interpretation because the Delhi High Court in Antrix, I don't want to say too much on this because I'm hearing this matter before the appeal is being heard by a bench of which I am a member. But as a matter of fact, in Antrix, the Delhi High Court took a view that the judgment, if it is understood, judgment of Indus Mobile, if it is understood in the manner that designation of a seat is akin to exclusive jurisdiction, the resultant effect might be that the judgment of Balco would have to be interpreted in a different manner. So referring to Section 20, Section 2, as well as Section 43 of the Act, the Delhi High Court held that both courts have jurisdiction. Merely because the selection of a seat is there, it doesn't mean that there's exclusive jurisdiction, which is being considered. But in the meanwhile, in the judgment in BGS Soma, Antrix was held to be bad law. Another judgment of Bombay, which took the same view, was also held to be bad law. And the view taken earlier in Indus Mobile versus Data Mint was upheld. And as and when there is a choice of a seat, the court at that place would have exclusive jurisdiction, is what was held in BGS Soma. There might be agreements where seat is not mentioned at all, only a venue is mentioned. Then what should happen has also been subject matter of discussion. Large number of English cases also have been taken note of by the Supreme Court in deciding these disputes as and when they arose. The tests that were adopted by the court, especially in Innercon, is a test of closest and most intimate connection with the contract. And again, there's another test of presumed intention, which has been adopted by the court in Harmony Innovations. The international position is that if the contract provides that a venue of the arbitration is in a particular state, in the absence of anything to the contrary, the seat of arbitration will be that state, wherever the venue is there, unless there is anything to the contrary. A three-judge bench in Hardy Exploration took a different view from the international point and then said that there should be something in addition to a venue for the purpose of coming to a conclusion as to what should be the governing law for the arbitration. In another case in Brahmini Steels, a division bench followed the international position, said that venue can be a seat unless there is anything contrary to it. That position was upheld in Soma. And Hardy was found to be not laying down correct law and in violation of the Constitution bench. The latest judgment on this aspect is the judgment of Justice Bhanumati in Mankastu Impex, where the point was argued saying that Soma could not have declared another three-judge bench wrong, but the Supreme Court did not go into that aspect, but held that venue and seat cannot be used interchangeably, and that the intention of the parties as to the seat must be determined from the other clauses of the agreement. And then she decided the matter on that basis. Without going further into various other aspects which will be dealt with by Mr. Vishwanathan, there are so many other aspects which also come to play. I think I've given a brief overview of what my understanding is on the provision as it stands. And any questions I will take later. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That brief overview has raised a lot of questions that I'm receiving on the Q&A window, but we'll keep them for the later part. Some of them may possibly be covered by the presentation Mr. Vishwanathan is likely to give now. I would now request Mr. Vishwanathan to give his presentation. Over to you, sir.
Give me a paper.
Honorable Justice Nageshwar Rao, Shashank, Samir, Vikas, members of the audience who have taken out time on a Saturday afternoon to join us for the seminar or the webinar. A very good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, let me convey the absolute privilege I deem in sharing a platform with the Honorable Justice Nageshwar Rao. I'm also happy to share the webinar platform with the hosts, Shashank, Samir, and Vikas, because we are undergoing very difficult times. Hopefully, we are around the corner in coming out of it. But it is webinars like this that keep us occupied and help us in spending the time productively. I must also thank Honorable Justice Nageshwar Rao for giving a complete overview of the Act and the judgments up to the latest one. What I propose to do is take the benefit of the presence of His Lordship here with us and air some of the concerns that are experienced. Not so much as to create any controversy, but to, since we have within an earshot an honorable judge, we could examine the Act and the judgments, which I will take you through in a PowerPoint, because I'm conscious that many of you would be experts. Some of you have written books on this, but there will be among you a lot of youngsters, a lot of beginners. So I thought I will first express the concern that that's presently being faced, and then we look at the judgments and then see if we can arrive at some conclusion to address the concerns that have emerged. Now, just to begin, you see the importance for this alternate dispute resolution, which Justice Nageswara Rao mentioned, is traced right in the Contract Act. There is a provision in section 28, subsection 3, which says, while any other agreement in restraint of trade would be, a restraint of legal proceedings would be void, an agreement to go to arbitration would be a valid agreement. That's because it's an effective alternative means. So if you exclude the established court process, the law says we condone it as long as you fall within the particular mechanism. Then we have section 5 and the general policy that there will be non-interference from the courts except where it is provided in the Act. And that has given room to a lot of issues. We will see in a manner as to address them in the way forward. Now, after the 1940 Act had its own problems, we had the 61 Foreign Awards Act, we have now the Consolidated Act of the 1996 Act. But no sooner did the Act get out of the stable, we encountered a problem in Bhatia. That's history now, but I'm recounting it to show that, the judiciary has a major role even now to play in interpreting not only the provisions of the Act, but also in interpreting the principles laid down. And there is a search now for arriving at some unanimity so that there is certainty in law. The judges can rule with certainty, the practitioners can give opinion with certainty. So in that light, if you see, Bhatia now created a stir when it said that notwithstanding that the seat was Paris, section 9, which occurred in part 1 would apply unless it was expressly or impliedly excluded. And you extend part 1 goes right up till including section 34, it goes further down till 43. So then came Venture, which said even though it was a foreign seated arbitration, they gave a green signal to challenge it in the Indian courts. A part of that issue is still at large. Ultimately came Balco with, of course, the famous para 197, and it settled the issue where it gave seat a certain exclusivity. In that background, if you see the our Act, before we get to the core of 34, there are some issues which have emerged on the periphery, which was highlighted, namely in the teeth of section 42, which says that you will go to that court to which first invocation was made. Parties started going to courts which had absolutely no jurisdiction. And this became a raging controversy till it was settled in Indus and ultimately in BGS Soma, which has, of course, had something to say on the Devas and Tricks judgment. Because parties were resorting, notwithstanding the express provision of a seat, to courts which, where otherwise the cause of action would lay in the subject matter, and then say that, you see, this is the court where we have first gone, all proceedings should follow. Now, that got settled in a very pro-arbitration judgment, and today it will be the seat, and unless there is something to indicate to the contra as per para 62, we will see them in the PowerPoint. The second issue that has arisen is with the interim awards being final in nature. I mean, partial final awards being final in nature, challengeable exclusively under 34. Which are the matters where finality has arrived at in the first award? That is one issue, a minor issue at that. Thereafter, you have this raging controversy of the modification of awards. I am giving you the overview. We will walk you through the PowerPoint and then try and address it. Interest awarded by the arbitrator, otherwise the award is okay, but court feels 9% is legitimate. Why cannot the court convert? Because unlike the 1940 Act, post setting aside, there is no power to remit. And McDermott had something to say on that. Delhi High Court has occasion to say on that. Notwithstanding the use of the word recourse in the chapter, one view is that, look, section 5 says non-interference, but that non-interference is in the context of frustrating arbitration. But if there is an interpretation which would further arbitration as a dispute resolution, that need not be beyond the ken. And that power to modify in a manner to prevent a remit on that issue, not a remit, a setting aside on that issue, and our interests have been modified both under 142, even outside 142, there have been modifications. The only justification I find is that such modifications are in furtherance of arbitration and not in frustration of arbitration. So that is a welcome move. Thereafter, the major issue, and I'm sure Lordship will appreciate that, is after laying down these standards, when you say that it is a summary proceeding, the arbitrator is the best judge of the quality and quantity of evidence. If it is a plausible view, it will not be interfered with. Unless it is perverse, it won't be interfered with. But ultimately, a court finding, some kind of injustice in its mind, some of them still fall prey to the appellate jurisdiction. Now, how do we keep off that varying standards? Now, this will have to be addressed on a larger scale, some kind of steady roster for a continuous period of time in the trial courts and the High Court, as well as it may have to be taken up at the Judicial Academy level, so that the conditioning of the mind to a judge, a very eminent judge, I'm not on the, quality of the judge, I'm on the exercise of power. You can't blame a judge if his conscience is disturbed with an award. But where do you draw the line? How do you apply these standards? And that has been the major concern in making India a seat in arbitration, because we are concerned with 34, which will apply to the two categories, exclusively domestic and international commercial arbitrations with India-seated international commercial arbitrations. So in the application of these principles, now that has to come by methods, which are outside the Act, like continuing education, culture of arbitration to set in. So with these broad issues, and of course, there is a feeling that a frivolous litigant is not mulcted with cause. So there is a tendency to happily go along and take a chance, which may not be the position abroad when they're in the seats where awards are subjected to challenge, because they'll be mulcted with heavy cause, and a lawyer asked of an opinion would have no hesitation in advising that, look, don't take a chance, you'll be faced with a very heavy cost because this is the level of interference. In England, there has been no interference between 16 and 18, and I'm told in 18, there have been only 2 cases where there was interference. I'm not saying there should be no interference. Sometimes interference would further the rule of law. A perverse, completely perverse award ought to be interfered to engender confidence in the machinery, confidence in the legal fraternity. So in that background, let us, because there's a wide cross-section, see the PowerPoint. there are certain nuances which practitioners may have to keep in mind as to when an award is deemed served, when would limitation begin. When you say 3 months and not 90 days as it is commonly understood, a very subtle judgment of Justice Ravindran explaining that it is 3 calendar months, relying on the General Clauses Act. Little points, but extremely important so that we don't miss the bus when it comes to that. When is it served? There was a case where it was served on the lawyer. They found that, the engagement terminates with the award and it has to be served on the party. Now, those are important aspects. We will now see them with what is arbitrable. Booz Allen was mentioned. Whether if you have not objected to jurisdiction, could you object at the section 34 stage? Let us now in that background see the judgment, and we'll come back to address these concerns. Now, if I can go to my PowerPoint. Yeah, I've been helped by my colleagues Ekalavya, Akila, Purv, and Venkataraman. I hope you find them useful. The statutory provision has been dealt with by the Honorable Justice Rao, so I will skip that for the time being, and let us get to the propositions in the time that is available. I'm not going to read them. I'll leave it with Shashank for those of you wanting to have a second look at it. Now, automatic stay was mentioned, the impression created by NALCO and other judgments that moment you file the 34, there was a stay is now completely removed. You need to apply under 36 and seek a stay. BCCI, there was an issue whether the 2015 amendment, which came into force from 23/10/2015, would apply to 34s filed for awards passed before 23/10. Court said, for 36, yes, and so 36 continued to be filed, and the amended provisions continue to apply for pending 34s, notwithstanding that awards were before 23/10/2015. Then SOMA was mentioned. Seat is now akin to an exclusive jurisdiction. Indus Mobile set the trend. Hardy created a dispute because the word used was venue. But then the SOMA has now settled it, and the subsequent judgment, which I had missed, and the Honorable Justice Nageshwar Rao mentioned that unless there is some contrary indication, it is very clear that seat has an element of exclusivity, just as Balco went by the seat theory for foreign awards also, and for international commercial arbitrations. 42 is an important provision. Devas Antrix was mentioned. That finds mention in SOMA. There's a resort by parties to courts without jurisdiction at all. Now that should end with this very pro-arbitration view. At last, don't forget that parties have chosen the arbitrator. It is a consensual form of adjudication, and hence it is only fair that they are held to their terms. And any judicial oversight given should be extremely limited, not a substitute for an appeal. No second bite of the cherry, as Redfern would put it in a passage which I read long back, and which finds mention in some of the judgment. I always thought it was second bite of the apple, because cherry is too small for a second bite. Summary proceedings, you see, this also is addressed by an amendment. Sashikala and MK Global saying that in extraordinary circumstances, cross-examination and affidavits, but now with the replacement of the words furnished proof, which occurred earlier, with the words record of arbitral proceedings, I think that issue is taken care of. Issue may still arise whether it applies to post 2019 challenges, or will it apply to pending challenges, notwithstanding that the awards of pre-2019, going by the view in SsangYong, one must at the moment proceed on the basis that these amendments will apply to pending proceedings. Then you see the power of arbitrator to grant relief against third parties. This is an issue whether third parties can invoke 34. No. Power to grant relief, no. That is fairly simple, but those of you, if you are to face with a problem, there are judgments on this. Arbitrator can rule under 12(6) because he forms his procedure, but following strictly the principles that it must be categoric, clear, and an ambiguous admission. Then we see, you see this framing of issue, additional issue now addressed. I already told you that. Thereafter, we see, one of the challenges could be that there was no arbitration agreement. It could be a very vague clause, but the effort has been, I remember Visa Steel was one such case, Shin Satellite. This is, I am on the severability of the clause to find an arbitration agreement. There is a provision to sever that part of the award which is invalid, that is in the body of 34, but these are all permissible so that arbitration is not frustrated. Then you see the principles, no interference with merits. The problem I addressed with you, where does merit end and where does perversity begin? The line is sometimes, getting very blurred, and that has to be addressed with some common approach. First of all, an approach that, look, you have chosen the arbitrator. This is not an appeal. He is the best judge. I will give you an interference only if it shocks my conscience or, strictly within those principles. But in its application, some amount of pro-upholding bias, like in the foreign awards. You remember in foreign awards in Korea, they have said it's a pro-enforcement bias. There's no reason why it should not be here, so that, the approach is clear. Though there is difference in the wordings. I'm not saying that they're identical. Public policy has been aligned now, we'll see that. Then the recent judgment in Southeast Asia Marine, award passed, set aside by the High Court, but the setting aside has been upheld by the Supreme Court, saying that on the price issue, there could not have been a payment on that basis. Now, whether it is an interference on the merits, have they traversed into the merits is for the future to decide. But there is a para, I think para 23, if my memory serves me right, where it says that was the only possible view. So it is a case more on perversity. Then as we go down, unreason is a very important area. You remember Justice Beg's famous passage in Kapoor versus Jagmohan, that reasons are the link between the facts and the ultimate conclusion. Section 31 expressly states that unless parties exclude, reasons are mandatory, quite contrary to what was in the 1940 Act. I remember Raipur Development Authority versus Chokmal Contractors. Law was no reasons unless agreed otherwise, except for state and instrumentalities of state. Now the position is quite the contra. Dyna Technologies, we'll just show you that. Yeah, Dyna says that requirement of reasoned order. You see, reason inspires confidence. Suppose there are absolutely no reasons. Read the highlighted portion. Coming to the last aspect, challenge of adequacy, the court, were exercising jurisdiction to adjudicate the validity of such an award based on the degree of particularity of reasoning required, having regard to the nature of issues. Degree of particularity cannot be stated in a precise manner. Here also, as long as the judiciary keeps in mind the fact that we will have, the effort will be to uphold the award. That's expressly laid down for foreign awards, that when it comes to enforcement or refusal, there you don't use the phrase setting aside. They have said it is a pro-enforcement bias which will rule. We will look to support the award. There's no reason why it cannot be, because we, as His Lordship pointed out, we are now mulcted with huge pendency. So those things can't decide the fate of a litigant. For him, it's an important case. But having chosen an alternative remedy, recognized in law, it's only fair that, he operates within the limited parameters prescribed. And those limited parameters have to be limited in its application. Then you see the courts don't sit in appeal. These have all now become legendary phrases. Mahanagar Telephone Nigam, again on appreciation, I don't want to labor this point. I told you highlighted. No second bite of the cherry. These are the words, all on this principle that, look, we'll look to uphold it. Will not be an appellate court. And I'm sure a judge, having heard RFAs for long, suddenly to shift gear, and when he reads an award, mentally to tune himself to the fact that it is an award under 31, challenged under 34, is going to be difficult. But I'm sure with training and the fine judiciary that we have, which is our hallmark, I don't think that is an insurmountable problem. Then you have deciding the agreement is substantial severability. That is, some agreements, could be vague, the arbitration agreements, but courts have severed those clauses, vague clauses, and have found in favor. Booz Allen was mentioned, categories are mentioned in the second para, rights and liabilities of give rise to criminal offenses, matrimonial disputes, express bar in 34(2)(b. You could point out and have the award set aside. I must point out that one issue which is engaging the attention of the court is Vidya Darolia. Following Booz Allen, special statute matters of eviction governed by the Rent Control Act was held outside the purview. But I think in Himangini, this got applied to a section 106, a Transfer of Property Act ejectment. So there is a reference pending. Arguments have been heard and judgment reserved. If it is not a special statute eviction, why can't arbitration provisions apply? We will await the judgment of the court. Narrow interpretation of public policy already addressed. The important thing is we are now aligned with the part 2, extremely narrow. Renu Sagar without interest of India, because that is now dropped by an amendment. Minor aberration in Fulchand, back on track in Lal Mahal. Further now in Sangyong, assimilating all that in an international commercial arbitration in 34. Vijay Karya applying it to enforcement of foreign awards. So it's now a very narrow, it should go to not mere violation of statutes, not mere violation of a FEMA rule or a provision, something which impinges on the core values and ethos of our democracy, our rule of law. The test is rule of law. If there is interference warranted, if rule of law will be furthered, interfere. But if rule of law will be frustrated by an interference because some party pointing out ready and willing, not pleaded as required under the Specific Performance Act, RBA permission not taken, all that will no longer be valid anymore. We can forget those arguments. This is on public policy. Patent illegality already adverted to. Under this guise, don't elongate public policy is a warning administered in Sangyong. Patent illegality taken out for 34 of international commercial arbitration by a specific explanation. This applies only to pure domestic awards where both parties are Indians. But the important thing is, how do you interpret it? You can't, under this rubric, bring in the prohibited areas. And that's a word of caution which is to be borne in mind. Associated builders, the evolution has been dealt with. Perversity, what is? This is a phrase which occurs in different branches of law. The last case mentioned is a criminal case of appeal against acquittal, pardon me. But the test is the same, where that's the only conclusion possible is different, and no person well advised in law would have arrived at that fact. But look at what Sangyong says. What is important to note is the decision which is perverse is understood in 31 and 32 associated. No longer being a ground for challenge under public policy would certainly amount to patent illegality appearing on the face of the award, finding based on no evidence at all. I mean, this starts with service jurisprudence case law, Goyal and other cases at all, or an award which ignores vital evidence in arriving at its decision would be perverse and liable to be set aside on the ground of patent illegality. Problems will arise in application, but if you condition the mind to the fact that it is an arbitration setting aside petition, not an appeal, the endeavor will be to uphold. I think the clarity will emerge, assurance will emerge in the mind of a judge that, look, yes, this is a case where I will interfere. This is a case where I will not interfere. Not any doubt in the mind. Award adjudicating accepted matters under 34(2). You see, there are certain accepted matters. If that has been gone into, that's clearly outside the purview. Where are we now? Yeah. Now, Limitation Act, you see, fraud will postpone till the knowledge of fraud. But they have said once you receive the award, thereafter there is a theory of unbreakability which has been brought in Radhabai. You need to challenge it within the time stipulated. Now 14 is extended from consolidated engineering, I remember. So soon after Popular came the issue whether if 5 is excluded. For example, for filing, Limitation Act won't apply. In several statutes, we invoke section 29(2) and say that, Limitation Act is neither expressly or impliedly excluded, but Popular has said that it is expressly excluded by reading the word but not thereafter. Question was whether 14 is excluded. They said no, but 14 till the period within that particular time. So that is the only thing you have to keep in mind. That we have already dealt with. Only after delivery of receipt, Tekotrichi cases which are old but which are relevant, because receipt by a competent authority by the party. There was a Karma Yogi Shelter versus Banarsi Das, which said service on advocate is not service on party. And this is an important judgment. We'll get to Karma Yogi. Himachal Techno on computation of this. All of us, most of us say, even I say that 90 plus 30. But actually, Ravindran brings out the distinction that it is 3 calendar months, and he relies on the General Process Act. Important because you could miss out on the time. Now, 37 is an interesting area. Limitation has been read in of 34, because otherwise they said purpose would be defeated. NV International and Lordships pointed out to me before we began the live webinar that Varinder Singh has subsequently also applied NV International, which means that don't think 37 is open-ended. You could go with a section 5 and have it condoned. You have to have the same limitation period. They've applied Lakshman Das's case to say that appeal being a continuation of a proceeding and the object being speedy resolution, we will not condone. Similarly, for refiling, traditionally refiling, you see, was considered different from filing. I remember 1978, Justice Kailasam's judgment, the Indian Institute of Science, which we would very often rely in suits and writs. The law here is different. The Delhi High Court set the trend, saying that we will look at the reasons minutely and then condone. Refiling will be qualitatively different, but you can't, use a refiling as an excuse, lodge some bare-bone 34 petition and then say I will wait till eternity to cure it. There are judgments of the Delhi High Court explaining that. Then 34(4) is an important provision before setting aside to see if they can, get rid of the points which may warrant setting aside. On a bare reading of this provision, amply clear that the court can defer the hearing of the application filed under 34 for setting aside the award on a written request made by a party to the arbitration proceeding to facilitate the arbitral tribunal by resuming the arbitral proceeding, or to take such other action as, in the opinion of the arbitral tribunal, will eliminate the ground for setting aside the arbitral award. The quintessence for exercising power under this provision is that the arbitral award has not been set aside. Whether the challenge to said award has been set up under 34 award, the deficiencies in the arbitral award, which may be curable, by allowing the arbitral award to take such measures which can eliminate grounds for setting aside. Unlike the old Act, no power to remit. 16 of the old Act dealt with it. McDermott says no modification remission, but we'll have to read it in the context of frustrating the provisions of arbitration. 34(4) pending the setting aside application. By application by a party, you could go back and come back, a provision which ought to be resorted to. Then you see we have Vikniwas, Madras judgment, and which is affirmed by Supreme Court in Kinari Malik, is not a remand like 107. It is a remand, a remit pending 34 to see whether it could be, cured. So, the possible setting aside grounds could be cured. Now, this is another area, power to grant interest. In the 1940 Act, the interest barring clauses, how do you construe? Under the old Act, you could pre-reference pendente lite and post-award. Interest power was there. Now, 31(7) it should read. 31(7) takes care of post-award, but from the time the cause of action till the date of the award, the arbitrator has jurisdiction. You will come across a lot of interest barring clauses. In spite of it, he may have awarded. One side may go and say it's an interest bar. Ambika, and those kind of cases, which you will see a very strict construction, including Reliance Cellulose, which dealt with some of the cases, including the cases under the new act. And as far as possible, the award of interest will be upheld. Problems have arisen in courts reducing interest, but I would think that we need to sustain that power, because the other fallback option is a disastrous option. And 5, if read, as we began with the opening, that if you interpret it in furtherance, and if you imply that power in 34, because it's in furtherance and not in frustration, I think the conundrum would be solved. Either consulting is the case for interest post-award, all that practitioners would be well aware. I don't want to labor because we need to get to the question session. Vedanta was a case, Shenzhen, where interest was reduced at DeHor's 142. It was a very interesting discussion on 6th of May. I went back and checked my WhatsApp group in our Indian Arbitration Forum by the active practitioners who day after day do this. Gayatri Balaswamy's case was mentioned by Anirudh Krishnan from Madras. Omar and Shashank mentioned Delhi judgments. Amit George mentioned the Delhi line. Kunal had something to say on the power. A lot of interesting discussion. So those of you part of the group, go and read that 6th May discussion. I found a lot of profit in it. We were on, interest being compensatory. I lost it again. Just give me a minute. Yeah, Vedanta, we have done with it. There was a case which was interest was modified. Then we have prior notice 5 and 6 are directory. 5 deals with notice to the opposite party directory. And I remember in the similar directory interpretation of 47 by Justice Rao on the foreign awards context in PEC. So these are directory provisions, but as far as possible, if you're aware of it, comply with it. The 1-year time limit is better if it is followed, but held to be directly impossible to follow under our setup. But there is some impetus after the Commercial Courts Act. Then, you see, this is another question. Suppose there is an award which is set aside and there is no adjudication on the merits. If the claim is barred by limitation and then it is set aside, you can't do anything about it. But if it's set aside for natural justice grounds, with no power to remit, the only option is to invoke arbitration afresh. If you want a judgment for that, SAIL in Delhi has elucidated it, relying on the passage in McDermott, saying no res judicata because there is no remit, there is no decision on merits. It is not a limitation issue. Claim survives, but on a technicality set aside. Puri construction following strictly the McDermott line of no modification. Third party, no locus to challenge, we already discussed that. And so with that, I think the concern that we have expressed, let me come back to the screen. Yeah. Yeah, with that, my view is that if you have same standards in terms of mental approach for upholding the award and pro enforcement because it is arbitration, and bring about uniformity by other methods of a steady roster, in the Judicial Academy, even lawyers. I think we also have a role. Let not place everything on the judge. We also have, a role. Easier said than done. You get a brief, you go the whole hog and argue. So with that, I think I would conclude my view that standards fine. We need to have consistency in application, imposition of costs, and a responsibility from our side also as to what you advise a challenge, what you don't advise a challenge, and help in a quick conclusion, because our aim is ultimately to make India an arbitration hub, and you will get India-seated arbitration only and only if you have a law which is robust and tuned to welcome that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. That was indeed a very, very detailed presentation, and I've been receiving requests on the side window for the copy of the PPT.
Oh, sir.
So I assure all the audience that that will be shared shortly. Sir's PPT has in fact answered most of the questions that Sabir and I had made in-house, but there are some questions that we have been receiving from the audience, which we may now like to ask both the panelists. Samir, would you like to begin with the first question?
Sure. Thanks, Shashank. I would like to thank Honorable Justice Nageshwar Rao and Mr. Vishwanathan for an insightful session on 34. My first question, sir, is to Justice Nageshwar Rao. This is in relation to the power of the challenge court on the 34 and the appeal court on the 37. We have seen that it's a welcome move that courts are interfering as far as the interest rate is concerned with the award. But what is there an inherent power under these two sections for the court to vary or amend the award? And if yes, where should the buck stop? How far can the court go in terms of varying that award?
So far as the interest is concerned, I don't think there's any mention here in the Act as to what should be given. The Interest Act would be applicable. I don't have any doubt about the Interest Act being applicable, but I haven't seen any judgment till now where inherent powers have been exercised by the court in enhancing interest. But the courts normally take note of the commercial transactions and the interest to be granted. And sometimes they do it, though they do not mention that they are exercising inherent power. But that's exactly what is happening now. But even from judgments which I have seen, it is the Interest Act that is applicable for granting for these awards.
Right, sir. And is there a power with the courts, with just an extension to this, where the court can interfere in something more than the interest? Can they change the award or amend or vary the award in aspects which are more than interest and based on, say, the merits of the case?
Which is the provision which deals with varying the award in 34?
There's none, sir.
So looking at 34 strictly, so the award should not be varied, which would mean that interest also should not be. But as I said, we see a number of cases where the commercial rate of interest is taken note of and then it is substituted. That is happening now.
Thank you.
Also, sir, there are a number of judgments which says wherever the Supreme Court has invoked powers under 142 will not have presidential value. So it will not really act as a precedent.
Yes, we keep saying that it will not be precedent.
Remains of some persuasive value nevertheless. So there is a question that I've received from Prateek Bagadia from Singularity Legal. His question is on section 42A. So I would ask either of the panelists, Mr. Vishwanathan or Justice Rao, to take it up. So I'll just read the relevant provision. Deals with confidentiality of information, notwithstanding anything contained in any other law for the timing imposed, the arbitrator, the arbitral institution, and the parties to arbitration agreement shall maintain confidentiality of all arbitral proceedings except award, where its disclosure is necessary for the purpose of implementation and enforcement of the award. Sir, in this regard, what he's asking is that the law clearly prohibits.
Which is the provision? Which is the provision you read?
42A.
42A.
Which is amended provision, sir.
Yes.
So he's saying the law clearly prohibits production of arbitration records before the court, even in cases of 34 and 37. If this provision is to be given force literally, then would it mean that in 34 and 37 now only the award should be furnished and not the arbitral record?
I don't think that is correct. If the court summons the record for the purpose of looking into the case, can it be said that it will be only the award that will be submitted before the court? See, Mr. Vishwanathan is right in saying that the very object of the act is to ensure that there is minimal interference with these awards. But it doesn't take away the jurisdiction of the court to look into the record on this ground of confidentiality. So it cannot be said that only the award would be produced. That's not the idea with which 42A is made. Notwithstanding anything contained in any other law for the time being in force, arbitral institutions and the parties shall maintain confidentiality of arbitral proceedings. But this doesn't include the court.
So
if you look at even the general litigation where you must have heard about certain instances where governments take this plea of not producing the records on the ground of confidentiality. They say that there are certain records which cannot be produced before the court. Sometimes when it is found inconvenient for production of records, this is the ground that is taken. But the court wants to see, it says that you get the records, we will see it, you might not be sharing it with the others. So
just to
cannot be
supplement,
kept away. Mr. Vishwanathan, you want to say something on it?
I just want, Lordship, see, section 34 2B has an explanation 1, which says that one of the grounds is that for the avoidance of doubt, it is clarified that an award is in conflict with the public policy only if the making of the award was induced or affected by fraud or corruption, or was in violation of 75 or 81.
Yes.
81, if you see, is actually a confidentiality clause. Admission of evidence in other proceedings shall not rely or introduce an evidence whether or not such proceeding relate to the dispute subject matter of conciliation, views expressed in respect of a possible settlement, etc. So this is a provision to reinforce that provision that, look, you have an obligation to maintain confidentiality. And if you seek to rely on that, that is making of the award induced or corruption of violation of 75 or 81. Now, if the arbitrator relied on it, to demonstrate that, he may have to show all that.
Yes, yes.
So I think it is only a reinforcement of that provision.
Yes, and 81 says that evidence, admissibility of evidence in other proceedings,
Yes.
speaks of shall not rely or introduce. So if the court summons the record, and then if a ground is taken, and if they want to see whether evidence in other proceedings or conciliation is being looked into, without seeing the record, the court cannot decide. The question is whether the court can summon the record.
Yes.
Under 42A, a party can say that I am not going to produce the records because of 42A, I will only give you the award. That was the question.
And even in privilege under 123 Evidence Act, nothing can be held back from the court.
That's right.
It can only be held back from the other side in public law.
Okay.
So this can only be understood in that context.
Samir.
Thank you. Sir, one question is in regards to when an application for stay of award is made under 36. So it says that it needs to be treated as a money decree, which leads to court ordering deposits of the arbitral amount. Now, is that deposit mandatory, or the court can, depending on the merits of the case and the judgment, cannot choose to order a party to deposit the money?
The principles of CPC are applicable is the law now. The interim order that is to be granted in any appeal filed against a money decree. In the normal course, I think it is a deposit of amount 50% or whatever. The provision in the CPC, I do not know whether it specifically says you have to deposit. There are cases where the court may decide no deposit is required. So deposit is not mandatory. I think you have to look into the CPC. Mr. Vishwanath, can you?
41 Rule 5, I think. Order 41 Rule 5.
Yes.
Traditional view has been deposit money decree, deposit 50% withdraw on security. Government, public corporations, etc. There was an exemption, but now by a judgment of Justice Sharan,
Yes.
that has also, they've been put on par. They've been put on par. Shashank, you recollect the judgment, begins with a P.
I can't recall the name of the judgment, but
yeah, State of West Bengal.
So,
Yes.
But court is not powerless.
Yes, sir. We'll move forward with a slightly broader question. Maybe Justice Rao would be able to answer this, sir. So the question is from Mr. Amba Prasad from L&T. He's asking, despite there being so many judgments on the scope of Section 34 and petitions are still being filed day in and out, and courts are being burdened to hear the matters which are going to meet the same fate, but after a prolonged period, how can this practice be curbed? Can there be any guidelines to commercial courts to decide on admissibility of these 34 petitions before the permission to deposit the award amount is made? Because sir,
See,
in Delhi High Court,
to answer this question,
yes, sir.
you'll have to deal with what Mr. Vishwanathan was saying. See, the mindset of judges has to change. If all of us are on the same page and proceed in a manner to further the scope of the act, the intent with which the act is made, whereby you want to ensure that there is speedy resolutions of disputes, especially in arbitrations. And, if interference becomes only an exception and not a rule in matters pertaining to arbitrations, that would solve the problem, number one. And number two, the question appears to be whether there can be any guidelines that are issued, special courts to be there for admissions, etc. As of now, there appear to be matters that are pending in high courts and the Supreme Court as well. Even 11 applications, apart from petitions that are filed under Section 34 for a very long period of time. I have to tell you that one of us who specializes in arbitrations has been venting this grievance for some period of time. And even the Chief Justice was informed, Chief Justice of India was informed about the need for these matters, commercial matters, to be taken up at an early, expeditiously and then disposed of. It would definitely help if even the high courts are also doing the same thing by listing these matters which have been pending for a long period. I'm told that there are matters which are pending for 5, 6 years or even more. So expeditious disposal of these matters would help. But even that doesn't answer the question. The question is whether there can be, at the admission stage itself, some guidelines issued to courts. I should tell you that in respect of constitutional courts, it's very difficult to issue guidelines to judges as to what they should do. And there cannot be any straitjacket formula. You can't say that 1, 2, 3, 4, you tick this and then either throw it out or admit it. That will not be possible. It's just training of the mind of each judge who is dealing with these petitions. I also see that for the past years, there is a change. Barring a few exceptions, most of the courts, high courts as well as the Supreme Court, is not inclined to interfere in matters as it was happening a little earlier. It's only within us that we have to develop this discipline.
So next question that we have.
Samir, I must thank Shashank. He's texted me the judgment on Order 41.5 and parity with government and private parties, PAM development versus State of West Bengal. That traces the law on all this.
I was told on the group by Dr. Shashwat Bajpai, sir. So.
Yeah, plus convey my thanks to him. I remember that it began with a P, but he remembered the real judgment.
Thank you, sir. This question doesn't relate to 34 per se, but does relate to post-award court interference. So the situation is that in case the seat of the arbitration was, say, Delhi, and now the enforcement of that award, can that be filed in Delhi when all the assets of the judgment debtors are located outside of Delhi? And whether there's a difference between execution and enforcement? How would that judgment of enforcement be executed on the assets which are located outside of Delhi?
Samir, para 97 of BALCO for execution takes you to the assets. So while the party agreed will file a setting aside in Delhi if he wants, the party enforcing under 36 will take it to the place where assets are located. Para 97, if I am not mistaken.
So is that a mandatory requirement to go only before the court where the assets are located? Can they alternatively file in Delhi as well?
See, there is a provision in the CPC, which I remember called a precept. You can take a transfer under Order 21's Rule 16, I think. It's called a precept, and yes, you can take it and execute it in the court where the assets are located.
Thank you.
Sir, we're now running out of time, so I'll take one last question. And
yes.
would request the attention of both the panelists. So, question is from Dr. Amit George. He is asking a court hearing a Section 34 petition if it finds that the award is amenable to interference under the extremely narrow parameters enshrined therein, is usually then tempted to deal with the evidence and merits of the case in detail in the judgment so as detailed application of mind while arriving at the conclusion to set aside the award. However, this has a deleterious effect on the law in as much as the judgment then becomes a precedent for merit review of an award. How does one therefore balance the need to ensure, while a judgment under Section 34 is well reasoned in arriving at a conclusion to set aside, it at the same time eschews observations and findings which would not have negative impact on the jurisprudence surrounding Section 34 challenges?
Once reasons are given, it is settled law that even an error that is made on fact as well as law is not for the courts to interfere in 34. So merit review is you are trying to find out whether those reasons are right or not. So the answer is that the mandate of law is that we do not go into the merits to review the decision of the arbitral tribunal. What is to be looked into for the purposes of satisfying the provisions of 34 is whether reasons have been given or not the merits of the reasons. So this is where the line is drawn, not to go into the reasons and then read them and find out whether these are sufficient reasons, these are good reasons, bad reasons. It's not for the court to do it. Even errors of law also, unless they are so stark, the court should not interfere is what the law is.
Just to supplement Justice Rao, the one way is to, reiterate the principles, and if it is unavoidable, confine it to the facts, and so that there is no precedential value for that part. You see, we are all aware that, ultimately when it comes between justice and precedent, honorable judges here, if only I can recollect Chief Justice William Rehnquist, he said in a private correspondence that when it came to constitutional law, stare decisis is nothing but a sham, he wrote. You see, it's a weapon for a judge to get out of it if there is a compete between justice and precedent. Judges know how to get out of it. But in the process, they just need to be cautious, perhaps, if I can use that phrase, the learned judge on the panel, that how to not unsettle the law so that that case doesn't, a hard case doesn't make a bad law for the future. So perhaps one way of addressing Dr. Amit's concern will be to set out the parameters and say that in this fact, confining it to these facts, I am inclined to interfere. And interfere only if it is grossly shocking the conscience of the court and with the conditioning of the mind that we have suggested.
Thank you, sir. With that, we have reached the hard stop time, that was 3:30. I would like to again express my deepest gratitude to our distinguished panelists, Honorable Justice Nageshwar Rao and Mr. K.V. Vishwanathan, to have spent time on a Saturday afternoon. And all the viewers who had joined us at 2 p.m., which is usually the nap time during the lockdown. But given the overload of webinars, we wanted to schedule it at such a time that everybody is able to watch this. I must also thank everybody who has supported us, especially CODR and Vikas for giving us the technology support, Indian Arbitration Forum, Arbitration India Group, Society of Construction Law Young Leaders Group, CADR, Manav Rachna University for providing us all the support needed. Thank you, everyone. We'll be sharing the presentation of Mr. Vishwanathan shortly through email and as well as on the various WhatsApp groups. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Judge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vishwanathan.
Thank you, Vikas, and thank you, Samir. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure, sir.